Welcome back, Sweet Chris here. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at NetSuite license pricing. So I'm assuming for the sake of this video that you are shopping around for an ERP, but you haven't yet purchased NetSuite. So I'm going to be walking you through how the pricing structure works when buying or really purchasing the software license itself, as well as some tips for getting the best deal and some traps to avoid. Now, a couple disclaimers out the gate. First off, NetSuite is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. So if you're already on, let's say, QuickBooks or even just using Excel as is, then you are going to have a very large jump in price to get onto NetSuite. It's not going to be some 20 or 50% increase. While I won't be getting into specific prices, just be aware that NetSuite is worth the money. It definitely is software that is fantastic and it brings a lot to the table, but in doing so, you are going to make a really significant jump in price, and you're going to be in that kind of level of small to mid-market software, which definitely comes with a price tag. The second disclaimer is that in this video, I'm not going to be discussing implementation or the costs that go along with implementations. That's really a whole nother category. And while there is some overlap, I already talk about that in a separate video. I'll include the link down below, but just be aware that in addition to everything that I'm talking about here, there is a whole nother subject of the cost that you're going to spend for actually getting the software implemented in the first place. So with that in mind, let's take a look at an overview on how the pricing works. And the analogy I like to use just to keep things really simple is almost like you were walking into a McDonald's and you want to buy something off the menu. When you look at the menu, obviously in a McDonald's, it's not that many options, but imagine if there were many, many more options. NetSuite specifically refers to the various products that you can buy as SKUs, just like if you're purchasing with a barcode. And in terms of SKUs, they have over 100 different SKUs. So a wide range of things you could purchase. Some of them are really just add-ons, like they give you more licenses or additional specific features. And some of the SKUs you really could think of more like packages where they include core NetSuite functionality as well as specific modules and features that are added into that SKU. Some of the most common kind of core SKUs that you can purchase are things like service SKUs, manufacturing, products, food and beverage, health and beauty. There's definitely many more beyond that, but those kind of cover a lot of the major clients that are coming into the sphere will be in one of those categories. So you would purchase, let's say, a service SKU. And in addition to that, if you needed some additional, let's say, feature or fixed asset management, you could also go and then purchase that SKU in addition to your service SKU. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're purchasing, let's say, a service SKU, and let's say there's 6 different features that come along with that SKU. So that the comparison is, let's say you're buying a Happy Meal and it comes with the burger and the fries and the drink, and there's a number of different items that come in that Happy Meal. Well, there's a lot of different things in there, but there might be something like the toy and you just don't need that. It doesn't have any added value for you. So in general, some people like to think that, well, if I don't need those additional features, I should just try to buy the 4 individual SKUs or products that I need and kind of cobble them together to get me what I want, as opposed to buying the service SKU that will give you kind of this whole package. But it really doesn't work that way in terms of pricing. You're not actually going to get a better price by trying to piecemeal buy each and every single thing that you need. Certainly, if you want to get the service SKU and then get some additional features on top of that, that's totally fine. But trying to piece things together part by part, you're going to find that the price is equivalent, or in some cases is actually going to be more, because when you break these things apart, the individual prices of each SKU is actually greatly more than if you just purchase them together. So in the vast majority of cases, you really just want to go with one of these core functionality SKUs such as products, manufacturing, etc. And then again, if you need to tack on additional things, that's totally fine. The other thing to think about is the fact that for certain SKUs, they have a tier system. So there is a starter tier a standard tier, and then a premium tier. So for example, let's say you're buying this service SKU. The starter tier, there's really two elements to the tiers. One is that each tier will give you a certain amount of users. So for example, the first tier is like not even a dozen users. Then when you move up to the second tier, the standard tier, you have up to 30 users that can be on the system. And then above that with the premium tier, you have anything above that. When you hit a certain cap on the premium tier, again, you can buy another module to go to an even higher amount if you've got, let's say, 1,000 users, etc. But with those three tiers, so that's one element, is that there's a certain amount of users for each tier. And in addition to that, there's also certain features that will come with each tier. So if you have a food and beverage SKU and you have the starter tier, then that's going to have just a certain amount of features that come along with that. The standard will have additional features. And similar to what I just brought up, where you kind of want to buy the Happy Meal all together, you don't want to start really ripping it to pieces. It's not going to be cheaper for you. You need to think with the fact that if you've got a certain tier that, let's say, the features match up, right? The standard tier might have all the features that you want. However, you know you only have 5 users, or you only need 5 users, which is really like a starter tier. Instead of trying to go, all right, well, I'm just going to get the starter tier, and then the features that I don't have in the starter tier, well, I'm going to go buy those as separate SKUs. Again, that is not going to end up being a better way to get a cheaper end price. In the end, you're going to find it's the same, or in some cases, actually going to be significantly more. So it's best to just go, what features do I need? Or even what users do I need, right? You might need a certain amount of users, even though it comes with features you don't really need. It's better to just go, I'll take the food and beverage at the standard tier. That covers my bases. That's fine. That's not where you're going to save money. And I'll give you tips coming up on how you can cut down on the overall cost. But that is, again, the structure of how their products are, and then how the tier system works for those products. The last thing to keep in mind when we're looking overall at how the pricing works is the fact that you're purchasing it in increments of 1 year. So instead of 6 months, you're going to be buying 1 year or 2, 3, 5, etc. And what's really important about that is that the clock starts ticking the second you sign that contract. It's not when you go live on the system and are actually getting benefit from it. It's the second you sign the contract. So if your implementation takes a year, you just paid for that software for 1 year and you weren't even on the system yet. So it's not necessarily any really way to get around that. Obviously, if you can have a better and faster implementation, then that's great, but there's not another way around that. It's just something you need to be aware of. So with that in mind, before I actually dive into the tips, I do want to say if you're finding this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more advisory videos like this. I have a whole series of videos that cover implementation, how to choose the best implementation partner, all kinds of different videos covering how you should handle and really get onto NetSuite for the first time. So if that's interesting to you, hit the subscribe button. And if you do end up purchasing NetSuite and you move on to it, then of course you and your team are going to need to be brought up to square zero in terms of training of how to use the software. And to do that, be sure to check out, I'll have the link up above as well as down below on the super training courses. I have almost a dozen different courses covering the entire spectrum of possible really topics and subjects. So you can take advantage of those resources and just look at the comments on any one of my videos and you'll get a feel for the quality of this training, especially compared to some of the other training that is available. So with that in mind, let's take a look into the 3 tips that I can give you on reducing the price of your NetSuite licensed software. And the first tip is really to just be cognizant of the fact that discounts are possible and that you should fight for a discount. No matter who you're purchasing from, you want to keep in mind that it is not uncommon at all to get a 20% or even a 30%, sometimes more discounts on, let's say you're buying a core SKU and then let's say 5 or 6 additional features, and that whole package you can get a discount on. In some situations, the sales representative that you're talking to will really be forthwith on what discounts are possible. Sometimes not so much. So you really just want to push that point and don't just settle for, let's say, a 5% discount or even a 10%. Fight for as big of a discount as you possibly can get. And just be aware that that is very possible. They are very flexible in their capacity to give discounts. So that's the first tip. The second tip is choose your partner. And really what I mean by that is be aware, you may or may not know this, but you don't have to purchase the software exclusively from Oracle NetSuite themselves. You do have the ability to purchase it from other people. And I'm not going to go over all the different partners that can be purchased from. I'm just going to select one in particular that in many cases is a great option, which is what are called, it's kind of like a category of partner referred to as solution providers. So solution providers are partners with NetSuite. They're consulting agencies that can sell you the software. They can also implement it and very often do so, as well as in many instances, they provide support as well. So when they sell the software, just keep in mind that they're not really resellers where they're purchasing NetSuite and then they have to sell it. They're more like acting as a liaison between you and NetSuite directly. So you are purchasing through them, but they're really just passing the software off to you and negotiating deals and kind of setting that up for you. Now, the reason I call this tip choose your partner is because I'm not going to blanketly say that you should never purchase the software from Oracle NetSuite themselves. There are certain instances where it might be the best option, but in a large number of instances, there are really a lot of motivating reasons why you would want to purchase the software from someone else, such as a solution provider. There's three main reasons that I think are important. And again, they're not going to apply in all instances, but they tend to be applicable and they tend to be pretty compelling reasons why you would want to go with a solution provider. The simplicity is the first factor is that the incentives for the salespeople, whether you're purchasing from Oracle NetSuite or a salesperson that works for a NetSuite solution provider, the incentives tend to be quite different between these salespeople. And again, without going too much into the details, the NetSuite sales representatives, they are incentivized to, of course, get the deal. So they're trying to get as many deals as possible, but also they're trying to get the biggest deals possible. So if that means putting in a whole lot of features that you may not need, again, they're incentivized to try to lean in that direction. And there's not a lot of penalties for doing so. Without going too much into detail, the incentives for the solution provider's sales representative is really on just getting the sale, doing anything and everything possible to get that sale, because they're not only getting the sale, which means regardless of whether it's a huge sale or even a smaller sale, that means they get a new commission structure on their part, which is great for them. But in addition to that, it goes without saying that if you're buying the software from them, you're also doing your implementation with them, which is another huge part of the sales representative's goal. So on the solution provider, for the NetSuite sales representative, they couldn't care less about the implementation. That might be done by NetSuite. That might get passed on to a different partner. It really doesn't factor into their motivation. So the solution provider has a lot more incentive to close that deal with you, which means they will put in more effort in general to try to get you the best deal, whether that means getting you a better discount or even being smart about what modules you actually need and maybe what modules you don't need to try to bring that overall cost low enough that you go, all right, I actually want to purchase from you as opposed to going and purchasing it from NetSuite directly. So that's the first factor. There's two other factors. And the second one is the fact that there is more responsibility. I a little bit touched on this when I was kind of talking about the fact that you can get a better discount, but the NetSuite sales representative, again, they're just going to pass you off to the implementation team and then eventually over to the support team. They don't hear any additional repercussions. If they oversold you on something, they're not going to hear about it. They're moving on to the next sale. If you look at a solution provider, these companies tend to be maybe 50 people, 100, 150. Some of them are bigger, but many of them are kind of in that more boutique range. So it's a smaller team. They really have to work with the sales representatives are in tight communication with the implementation team. They, in some cases, will have pressure put on them if they're constantly overselling to customers that the implementation team now needs to figure that out. Or if they overpromise to the customers, they're going to hear about it from their coworkers. So there's a little bit more of that internal pressure. And the fact that the solution providers, they're going to take you all the way from the sale, they're going to streamline you right into the implementation, and then they're going to follow up on the support. A lot of times it's really the same team that's doing that entire cycle with any given customer. When you're dealing with NetSuite, it's a massive company. They're much more siloed off. Sales is totally separate from the implementation team, is totally separate from support. So there's a little bit less responsibility taken from the sales representatives. Again, I am talking about generally. I'm not going to completely badmouth and say that no sales representative from NetSuite has ever taken responsibility and done a great job, but just the way it's structured, it tends to favor other partners such as solution providers. And then the third factor, in general, if you look at how NetSuite operates, they tend to hire a lot of recent college graduates. So kids that are just coming out of business school, NetSuite picks them up, will put them through crash course training. NetSuite's a great employer, so they do a lot of work to build up their new guys. But in general, they'll tend to have a younger, less experienced team, not just on the implementation side, but also on the sales side. A lot of those more veteran guys that really build up 5 years of experience and get quite proficient as implementers or as sales representatives, they then move on from NetSuite and get a job working for one of these solution providers. So in general, if you go with a solution provider, you're going to tend to get a more experienced individual that's working with you. They just have a lot more longevity in the field than some of the college students that you're going to deal with when working with NetSuite. And that's especially important in the sales cycle because you're going to be describing your company to these guys. You want them to fully understand what you're talking about and know exactly what you need to buy and what you don't need to buy to have a successful implementation. So because of those three factors, overall, I know, it took a little while to go through, but the solution providers or any of the other partners you can go with tends to be a smarter decision to go with an alternative partner compared to buying from NetSuite directly. And then the third tip is to take advantage of NetSuite's fiscal year, especially their fourth quarter, which ends May 31st. If you're purchasing NetSuite in that quarter as close to May 31st as possible, you have the possibility of getting an even better discount. So if you were in a situation where you might have been able to get a 30% discount on your full package, you might be able to get as much as a 40% discount. That's not unheard of on your full package just because there's obviously stockholders for NetSuite. They're trying to have great fourth quarter figures. And if you can be another sale in that time period, they have a lot more incentive to try to really close you at that moment. So if you're able to purchase in that window, take advantage of it. Don't wait until June to decide that actually you now want to buy NetSuite. So those are the three tips when purchasing NetSuite. Now let's take a look at 3 traps to avoid. And the first one is in relation to the time frame that you buy for. Remember I said it's in 1, 2, 3 years, etc. In general, most people think of the fact that if you can get a longer package with a company, most companies want that, right? They'll give you benefits and cheaper rates if you get a full year plan or 2 year or 10 year, something like that. When it comes to NetSuite, they actually favor 1 year plan, the shortest plan possible. And the reason for that is because it's kind of the converse of when you're buying anything else. When another company knows they can get you in for 5 years, well, they've locked you in for that. So they get their money, and even if you don't like the product or don't use it, you're locked in for 5 years. When it comes to NetSuite, they know that the entry fee itself to implement and change over and all of the costs and the trouble that go along with that, that's what's locking you in. So in fact, they prefer if you only get a 1 year plan, if you're buying from NetSuite directly, because what ends up happening is you buy a 1 year, you've now just implemented NetSuite, so you're not going anywhere. You're not just going to switch on to Acumatica in year 2. And now when you come back to purchase your second year of the software, Well, then it's open game and they can jack up the price and now you're stuck with it. You have to pay this additional price. So in general, if you are capable of doing it and you're able to go with a longer term period, let's say 3 years, or that tends to be the sweet spot where you kind of know where you're going to be in 3 years and you can plan for that. And you're not going to be stuck with a 1-year contract. 3 years can be great. In some cases, though, if you can think enough in the future, a 5-year plan might even be beneficial. And that leads into the second trap, which in my opinion is possibly one of the most important things I'm going to mention in this video. And that is to negotiate proper terms in your contract. And what I mean by that, there's a few different elements, but specifically coming off of that, talking about the fact that you've got this, let's say a 1-year contract, that means year 2 rolls around and you're now renegotiating your price with NetSuite. So what happens at that point is they can increase your price. And let's just give a somewhat of a simple example. Let's say the full price of everything that you were buying with NetSuite for your license agreement, let's say the list price for all of that was $100,000. And let's say you managed to get a 50% discount. So you're only spending $50,000 in that first year. Well, when the second year comes around, they're going to jump you up by, let's say 15%. And that 15%, that doesn't just mean 15% of 50, that's 15% of the full $100,000 list price. So year 2, you're now spending $65,000. That's a massive increase from what was originally already a pretty hefty price of $50,000. So that you need to keep in mind. The way to get around that, there's no way to duck out of any price increase. NetSuite is simply going to take advantage of that, but you can, in your original contract, you can negotiate what's called a renewal cap. And it basically means that when they do jump the prices, they can only do it by so much, maybe 4 to 5%, which is a massive difference between that and something like 15 or even more in terms of a jump up in price. So renewal cap is so important, and oftentimes something that is just not mentioned by the sales representatives. You need to bring it up and you need to ensure that that is put in your contract. Another element you can add as a term on the contract is something called a price lock. And that basically means that, let's say you get a 35% discount on overall when you're first purchasing NetSuite and the various SKUs. You want to make sure that if, let's say 6 months or a year down the line, you need to get an additional feature, you want to get it at that same discount of 35%. You don't want to have to pay full price on that new feature. So you can get what's called a price lock, will ensure that when you are getting on any new additions, you can bring them in, kind of like grandfather them in with that original discount. So again, that's a very important thing. Negotiate those terms. And the third and final trap to avoid is don't get oversold. And there's a couple different elements to that. Obviously, you don't want to buy modules and SKUs that you simply don't need, but I kind of already referenced that in the tips section. Really what I'm getting at here is be aware of the things that NetSuite does well and the things that NetSuite is not strong at, such as Suite People or the marketing module. These are features that NetSuite just doesn't do very well. And if they're features that you absolutely need, I'm not just referring to those two, but any of these things, you need to be aware that you're not just stuck with the NetSuite feature. There is a pretty broad NetSuite ecosystem of products that can integrate in with NetSuite and really bolster it in areas that it is weak. So it's much better to simply go with the proper option at the beginning as opposed to trying to rely and purchasing some NetSuite feature that you're going to realize maybe a year down the line is not fulfilling your requirements. And now you're locked into paying for that and you have to get an additional integration. So just be aware of that and willing to look at the full range of options when you are doing your implementation. And that's it for NetSuite pricing. I hope you found this video helpful. I know I covered a lot of different things, so I do want to quickly recap on some of the most important points. First off, if you can go with a NetSuite partner and not purchase from NetSuite directly, there's a lot of positives behind going with that option. Secondly, make sure you get that renewal cap. That one is so important. And really, when you're looking at the long term, it really adds up. Third, make sure that you fight for the biggest discount possible. I might have even underplayed some of the available discounts. There's a lot of flexibility for pricing when it comes to NetSuite, so keep in mind you don't get what you don't ask for. So hopefully this was all helpful for you. If so, definitely hit that like button, subscribe for future videos, and I'll see you next time.